It is a truth universally ignored, except perhaps by underpaid porters and the occasional hysterical aunt, that a hatbox ought not to weigh 28 pounds. Yet it was precisely this violation of Newtonian modesty which caused Lord Peter, death-breeden Wimsey, to lift one languid eyebrow on the 10:34 from Paddington to Midhurst, just before the train drew to an elegant wheezing stop at Parbold Halt. "That," he said, turning to his man Bunter, who was rearranging the rug with the discreet precision of one who considers temperature a matter of discipline, "is either an unusually dense hat or an unusually light corpse." The remark might have passed as one of his lordship's more flamboyant jests, had not the hatbox in question, an ostentatious round affair of battered burgundy leather, toppled end over, end off the brass rack and split open at his feet with the audible sigh of worn hinges giving up the ghost. There was, unfortunately, no corpse inside, only a pair of patent leather dancing slippers, a crumpled satin frock of dubious provenance, and a bottle of Rigaud perfume with a cracked stopper. The contents were oddly wet. Bunter, who had just finished brushing a fleck of lint off Wimsey's sleeve, stared down and sniffed cautiously. "I believe, my lord," he said, "that we may have an instance of feminine vanity improperly preserved. The scent appears to be mingled with, may I say, an aromatic viscosity inconsistent with cologne." "Blood," murmured Wimsey, with the pleased interest of a man who finds his crossword clue was in fact a pun. "I should not like to confirm." "Without a microscope," said Bunter, "but yes, possibly arterial." Before they could examine the matter further, a flustered lady in a widow's toque burst into the compartment, white-gloved hands fluttering like debutante moths. "Oh, dear me, how dreadful. I say, that's mine. I mean, it was packed." "For me, my sister said the train guard, how utterly abominable, it's been such a day." Lord Peter, standing with one foot perched lightly on the remains of the hatbox, and his monocle glinting with amiable menace, gave her a courtly bow. "Madam," he said, "one generally prefers to receive a lady's garments after an introduction. May I ask if you habitually scent your wardrobe with bodily fluids, or is this a recent innovation in the art of mourning?" The woman gave a choked sob. "I don't know anything about blood. It's absolutely horrid." "Indeed it is," agreed Wimsey cheerfully. "Bunter, make a note. Hatboxes ought not to contain hemoglobin. It offends the aesthetic sensibilities and leads to quite unnecessary fuss." The lady's dismay escalated into tears. The guard, when summoned, was all furrowed brow and bureaucratic moustache. There were apologies, denials, offers of porters, and portmanteau. But the smell persisted, and so did the stains, dark and sticky on the frock's hem, unmistakable to those who know. Wimsey, with a remarkable delicacy for someone poking at evidence with a walking stick, fished from beneath the puddled satin a scrap of black cloth bearing a button and a crimson smear. "I say," he murmured almost to himself, "someone packed this hatbox in rather a hurry, or else they have a taste for theatrical concealments. But if it's concealment, why the train? Why let it fall? Bunter, do remind me later to investigate the physics of hatbox balance under sudden deceleration." "As you wish, my lord." There was perhaps a further question, one which none of the assembled passengers, nor the sputtering widow, nor the increasingly irritated station-master dared articulate, but which hung in the air like pipe smoke in a closed study. If the bloodied garment did not belong to the weeping woman, and the scent was not hers, and the weight of the box belied its contents, what precisely had been removed before the train reached Parbold Halt, and who, for that matter, had removed it? Lord Peter, who had already lit a Turkish cigarette and was now quoting Hamlet under his breath, a king of shreds and patches, showed no sign of being in any particular hurry, but he did glance at the faint smear of red on the compartment's door handle and smile in that disconcertingly affable way he had, like a man pleased to see the world proving once again that it was infinitely more perverse than even he had dared hope. "Come, Bunter," he said. Let's pay a social call on the local constabulary. It's just possible someone's lost a corpse, and I do so hate when people mislay things." Wimsey, having delicately brushed a fleck of imaginary ash from his lapel, escorted the widow off the train with a courtesy more suggestive of a dance at Almack's than the conclusion of a grotesque incident involving bodily fluids and crushed taffeta. She clung to her reticule with white-knuckled fervour, sniffling like a child who had been told there would be no pudding. "A Mrs. Halliday, was it?" he asked, offering her his arm in a manner that implied both comfort and subtle restraint. "And bound for little dithering," she muttered. "Just for the week. My sister, her poor husband passed on Tuesday. Dreadful bronchial thing, so sudden. Of course she couldn't possibly have, she never would. Well, not anything like that in the box." "No, no, perish the thought," said Wimsey kindly. "One seldom packs murder alongside one's toothbrush unless one is frightfully organised. Still, it seems an extraordinary misadventure. You're quite sure your sister packed the box? You didn't see to it yourself?" She shook her head. "No, I was terribly rushed. Agnes, you see, she's my maid. She did the trunk and my hatbox and handed them off at the flat. I barely had time to change. Very proper. One should never supervise one's own packing." "It destroys the natural order of things," said Wimsey. He turned to Bunter. "Did you catch the label on the case?" "Indeed, my lord. Mrs. J. Halliday, C.O. Miss L. Marlowe, Ashby Lodge, Little Dithering, Sussex. The paper is recent, creased but dry. Pasted rather hastily. The cord also appears to have been replaced." Mrs. Halliday blinked. "Well, Agnes is dreadfully bad with string," she offered, which Bunter acknowledged with a small, courtly bow of comprehension that carried precisely the level of disdain the remark deserved. At the tiny, gabled station of Parbold Halt, where the platform was only slightly longer than Wimsey's Daimler, and the station master resembled a retired beetroot in uniform, the commotion had already attracted interest. A man with copper buttons and an unfortunate moustache stood frowning beside the wreckage of the burgundy hatbox, poking it with the kind of skepticism usually reserved for spoiled fish. "Can't be any trouble," he said stoutly. "Not from Parbold. Place hasn't had trouble since the curate got caught making etchings of the vicar's wife's geese." "I say," said Wimsey cheerfully, "are you the local constabulary or merely a connoisseur of ecclesiastical fowl?" "Sergeant Upton, West Sussex Constabulary," came the wary reply. "You the gentleman what called it in?" "I am the gentleman who had the singular honour of sharing a compartment with Mrs. Halliday's unexpectedly sanguine wardrobe. Yes," he extended a card. "Lord Peter Wimsey. A pleasure, I'm sure." Sergeant Upton squinted at the name as though it were written in Sanskrit, then grunted. "Heard of you. That thing with the violinist and the monkey skull?" Wimsey beamed. "Ah, yes. The unfortunate business in Chelsea. Fascinating acoustics in that flat. Now then, Sergeant, I wonder if I might make a few quiet inquiries while you secure the, remnants." Mrs. Halliday had been escorted inside the station-master's office with a cup of tea and some clucking noises provided by a matronly porter's wife, and Wimsey now strolled out with Bunter in tow toward the waiting cab rank, where a single, reluctant pony-trap stood looking scandalized at the entire affair. "Little Dithering," Wimsey said, tapping his cane thoughtfully. "It's not far. 5 miles? Let us go pay our respects to Miss L. Marlowe, lately bereaved, and let's be careful how we tread. It's very early yet to decide whether our corpse has been mislaid or merely well disguised." Ashby Lodge proved to be one of those modest country houses that survived the Edwardian era by pretending it had never existed. Red brick, ivy-choked, and smelling faintly of boiled beef and morning crepe. The door was answered by a girl in black bombazine and an apron, which bore the unmistakable watermark of recent tears. "I've just this minute finished dusting the parlour," she said in outraged tones, clearly interpreting the arrival of visitors as a form of moral failing. Lord Peter Wimsey to see Miss Marlowe, said Wimsey, removing his hat with a graceful flourish. A matter concerning her late husband. Or was it brother-in-law? Or, what was it, Bunter? Her brother, my lord, said Bunter with quiet certainty. Major Theodore Marlowe, formerly of the Queen's Own Fusiliers, passed away the 3rd of June from bronchial complications, that's all. Maid blinked. You're that lord what's in the newspapers, aren't you? No, no, said Wimsey gently. That's the other one. I'm the one nobody invites to weddings. Inside, the drawing-room was dim and over-furnished, its chintz-smothered surfaces seemingly arranged to discourage both comfort and movement. A woman sat stiffly on a sofa, her spine so upright it might have been reinforced with steel. She was in her mid-40s, sharply featured, and entirely without the usual softness of recent grief. Her eyes were dry. Her dress was not new. My sister has had an accident, she asked when Wimsey introduced himself. Not precisely, said Wimsey, selecting a wing-back chair with feline precision. One might say that her luggage has. She arrived at Parbold Halt with a hat-box which contained, among other curiosities, a heavily stained gown, a broken perfume bottle, and what appears to be blood. Miss Marlowe did not flinch. How extraordinary. Did she bring it from London? So it would appear. She claims the maid packed it. Agnes, is it? A silence. Then yes, Agnes Hart. Been with her for nearly 3 years. Dreadfully loyal? A trifle sullen. Wimsey smiled. That's all right. I'm frightfully loyal and abominably sullen myself. May I ask whether Major Marlowe, your brother, left the house at any point on Tuesday, the day of his unfortunate collapse? No, she said promptly. He was quite unwell. Dr. Lemming visited about noon. The vicar came to read prayers around 3. Theodore died in his sleep that night. We had to send to Chichester for a certificate. Indeed, murmured Wimsey. All very tidy. Miss Marlowe's mouth tightened. I beg your pardon. Forgive me. My mind wanders. I was thinking about cologne bottles and hat boxes and curious matters of weight. Do you know, Miss Marlowe, just how much a woman's hat usually weighs? I failed to see. About 9 ounces, he said pleasantly. Yet your sister's hat box was over 28 pounds. One might reasonably suppose it contained something other than hats. Miss Marlowe rose. If you are accusing either myself or Mrs. Halliday of some impropriety, I shall be forced to— Not at all, said Wimsey, rising with a bow. I am merely suggesting that we may be in the presence of something not quite accounted for. One always begins with hats, of course, but the weight of things, yes, that has a way of betraying us. They took their leave with civility, though Wimsey's last comment earned him a look of such frozen fury from Miss Marlowe that even Bunter later remarked upon it. Back in the trap, Bunter cleared his throat. You believe the hat box once contained something heavier, my lord? Indeed, said Wimsey, something that bled. Something removed between London and Parbold. But not recently, I think. No, Bunter, the question is not what was in the box. It's what was meant to be. And Miss Marlowe, she's hiding something. Not guilt, I think, not yet, but fear. And a curious lack of grief. Did you notice she referred to her brother as Theodore? Not my brother. Always that slight distance. But it was her timeline I liked best, my lord. The vicar came at 3, said Wimsey, staring out at the hedgerows as they passed. The doctor at noon. The brother dies quietly that night. But suppose, just suppose, he did not. Suppose instead that someone else left the house that evening, someone carrying a heavy hat box, and someone else saw it. He smiled to himself. Let's go have a word with the milkman. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the dappled canopy of the village green as Wimsey and Bunter made their way toward the small dairy on the corner of Little Dithering's High Street. The scent of fresh hay mingled with the faintly sour tang of churned cream and manure, a reminder that, despite the veneer of civility, country life maintained a stubborn hold on earthy realities. "Milkman, eh?" Wimsey remarked, surveying the low, whitewashed building with a gleam in his eye. A most unassuming figure, yet frequently the unwitting custodian of village secrets. One suspects they hear far more confessions than the vicar himself. Bunter nodded, adjusting the crease of his trousers and casting a glance at the orderly rows of empty milk bottles neatly stacked outside the door. And the one to be trusted with the chronology of daily life. No one fails to recall whether the milk was late or sour. Wimsey smiled, fingers lightly brushing the top of his cane. "Exactly so. Now, Sergeant Upton suggested the milkman hereabouts was named Mr. George Pelham, a man of no small importance to the local gossip mill, if the stationmaster's face was anything to judge by." They entered, greeted by the warm clatter of tin, pails and a nervous young man with cheeks reddened by the morning's work. "Mr. Pelham, I believe?" Wimsey began. "Lord Peter Wimsey. This is my assistant, Bunter." The milkman blinked, evidently startled by the presence of aristocracy in his modest shop. "Yes, sir. What can I do for you?" "We're investigating a peculiar incident involving a hatbox," Wimsey said, allowing a faint twinkle of irony to play about his lips. "One that arrived on the 10:34 train with more blood than should reasonably be found in one's afternoon toilette." Pelham swallowed and wiped his hands on his apron. I did hear about that, sir. Quite the scandal, they say." "Indeed," said Wimsey. "Tell me, Mr. Pelham, do you deliver to Ashby Lodge?" "Yes, sir, every morning at 7:30. "Same as always. Miss Marlowe pays cash weekly, no complaints. And what about Tuesday last? Did you notice anything out of the ordinary?" The milkman furrowed his brow as if searching memory's ledger for discrepancies. "Well, now you mention it, Tuesday was a bit odd. Miss Marlowe wasn't home when I called. The door was locked. Tight, which is unusual. I knocked twice, but no answer. I left the bottles on the doorstep and moved on." "Did anyone else come or go that morning?" Wimsey inquired. "Not that I saw, sir. But old Mrs. Treadwell across the lane said she saw a man carrying a heavy box from Ashby Lodge about 9 o'clock. Didn't recognize him." Wimsey's eyes narrowed slightly. 9 o'clock, and your delivery was at 7:30. "Exactly, sir. So someone was moving about after your milkman had been and gone. Most helpful, Mr. Pelham. And did the vicar visit that day?" Pelham nodded. "Yes, Reverend Jenkins came round around 3 as usual. Saw him myself." Wimsey tapped his chin thoughtfully. A tidy timeline, save for one shadow. This mysterious man with the heavy box at 9 o'clock. Perhaps our culprit? Or the carrier of a secret, Bunter suggested softly. "Indeed," agreed Wimsey. "If only we knew what was in the box, or more precisely, what was taken from it." They left the dairy with more questions than answers, but a growing sense that the village's veneer of tranquility was cracking beneath a pressure of hidden movements and silent conspiracies. Their next stop was the vicarage, a modest brick house, festooned with climbing roses and the faint aroma of beeswax polish. Reverend Jenkins was a thin man with a nervous twitch and a habit of clearing his throat at inopportune moments. "Ah, Lord Peter," he said, offering a quavering hand, "I understand there's some fuss over a hatbox, quite unsettling for our quiet parish." Wimsey inclined his head. "Indeed, Reverend, a peculiar affair involving Mrs. Halliday's luggage and a certain Mrs. Marlowe's late husband. Might I ask what you recall about your visit to Ashby Lodge on Tuesday?" The vicar swallowed. "Well, I went around as usual. I was to read prayers for Major Marlowe. The family asked for a quiet service. I found the house rather still. Miss Marlowe herself seemed reserved. The Major was resting upstairs." "Did he appear gravely ill?" "Oh, yes, frail, pale. I prayed by his bedside. There was nothing more I could do." "And the time?" "About 3 o'clock, as I say." "Did you notice anyone else around the house?" Staff, visitors. The vicar hesitated. Only Agnes, the maid. She was particularly withdrawn. I thought it odd, but said nothing. Withdrawn or frightened? Perhaps both. Wimsey noted the vicar's discomfort. Thank you, Reverend. Your candour is appreciated. They departed with the vicar's uncertain blessings and a subtle sense of unease hanging in the air. Bunter observed, the timing fits neatly with the doctor's visit and the vicar's prayers. It is the interval afterward that remains obscure. Precisely, said Wimsey, and that brings us back to Miss Marlowe's curious reaction and the enigmatic presence of a heavy box at 9 in the morning. Let us visit Agnes, the maid, was found in the scullery of Ashby Lodge, scrubbing the copper kettle with the fervour of one intent on cleansing more than mere metal. Agnes Hart? Wimsey asked. The young woman looked up, startled and guarded. I'm Lord Peter Wimsey, he said, and this is my assistant, Bunter. We're inquiring about Major Marlowe's passing and some unusual events surrounding Tuesday. Agnes's hand stilled, and her eyes flicked nervously between the two men. Did you pack Mrs. Halliday's hatbox? Wimsey continued gently. She swallowed hard. Yes, sir, but it was nothing unusual, just clothes and things. And the stains? Agnes bit her lip. I don't know about any stains. I packed it properly. Properly enough to replace the cord and secure the box so tightly it might conceal secrets? Wimsey asked, watching her carefully. The maid's composure faltered. It was heavy, sir. Heavier than it should have been. Who carried it onto the train? I did. Mrs. Halliday was late, so I took it myself. I didn't look inside. Wimsey regarded her with mild curiosity. Did anything happen after the doctor left? Did you see anyone carrying boxes or acting strangely? Agnes shook her head. No one but Miss Marlowe. She was upset, but I thought it was just grief. And the Major? Did he die peacefully? Agnes's eyes clouded. I don't think so, sir. There was noise that night. I heard shouting. Miss Marlowe told me to say nothing. Wimsey's interest piqued. Shouting? At what time? Late, after the vicar left. I don't know exactly. Thank you, Agnes. You've been very helpful. Outside, Wimsey lit a cigarette, drawing the smoke slowly between his fingers. There it is, Bunter. The missing piece. A disturbance. After the vicar's visit, something Miss Marlowe wishes kept quiet, and a heavy box carried in or out under cover of darkness. Bunter nodded thoughtfully. A concealed body, perhaps. Or something else designed to mislead. The bloodstains, the weight, the haste of packing, it all suggests a desperate attempt to conceal a truth too inconvenient to face. They left Ashby Lodge, the sun dipping lower and casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward some dark revelation waiting just beyond reach. The village, with its whispering lanes and tightly shut doors, was a puzzle that Lord Peter Wimsey intended to solve, one careful step at a time. Wimsey and Bunter returned to the village centre, their footsteps measured and minds turning over, the details like the well-worn pages of a detective's notebook. The village itself, despite its quaint charm, seemed to fold inward on secrets, the polite facades barely concealing the tensions simmering beneath. As they passed the butcher's shop, a scarred oak door with a swinging sign that creaked softly. In the afternoon breeze, Wimsey paused and turned to Bunter. Before we pursue shadows and boxes, I am struck by one particular detail, Bunter. The cord on the hatbox, replaced. What does that imply about the timing of its last opening? An attempt to reseal it, presumably, Bunter replied thoughtfully. If Mrs. Halliday's maid did pack it in haste, one might expect such a replacement to be hurried and perhaps imperfect, indeed. But the question is when. The maid swears she carried it onto the train, heavy as it was. Yet the presence of blood and the broken perfume bottle inside suggest violence, possibly not recent but certainly present. Was the cord replaced in London or en route? They stood outside the village post office. a small establishment where the postmistress eyed them warily through her spectacles. With little ceremony, Wimsey approached her. "Good afternoon, madam. Might I trouble you to look through the parcels and packages dispatched from Little Dithering last Tuesday?" The postmistress's lips pursed as she regarded Wimsey. "Certainly, sir, though I'm afraid I'm but the clerk. You'll have to ask Mr. Pritchard. He's been out on business, but he should be back by evening." "Very well," Wimsey said, bowing politely. "We shall await his return." Turning away, he mused aloud. The railway must not have been the only route by which that Hatbox, or what was once inside it, travelled. Bunter, ever precise, adjusted his glasses. And if the cord was replaced mid-journey, that might explain the ill-fitting knot, an unskilled hand attempting to conceal something hastily. As evening approached, the village began to quiet. The streets emptied, save for the occasional figure hurrying indoors or pausing to close shutters. Wimsey and Bunter returned to the inn to wait for Mr. Pritchard's return, the hour growing late but their determination unwavering. When at last the postmaster arrived, a stout man with greying hair and a perpetually furrowed brow, Wimsey wasted no time. "Mr. Pritchard, I am investigating an unusual matter involving a hatbox belonging to Mrs. Halliday. Would you kindly inform me if any parcels matching that description passed through your office on Tuesday?" Pritchard nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir. There was a heavy box sent to Little Dithering, though it was marked as fragile. Odd that for a hatbox. Was it sealed properly?" "Not at first, no. The seal was broken and then replaced. The clerk mentioned it in the log." Wimsey's eyes gleamed. "Precisely. Do you recall who signed for it at the destination?" "A Miss Hart, if memory serves. Agnes, the maid, I believe. So the box passed from London to Little Dithering with a broken seal and a replaced cord. Something was taken or added en route." "Seems so, sir," said Pritchard. Bunter interjected. "And the bloodstains? Does that not imply violence?" "Not necessarily recent," Wimsey said. "Blood can dry and remain concealed until disturbed. The question is whether the blood was inside the box before the cord was replaced." The postmaster frowned as if grappling with the logistics. "We do our best to keep parcels safe, but sometimes things get mixed up." "Indeed. And sometimes, Mr. Pritchard, one parcel conceals more than just cloth and perfume." Later, as the fire crackled low in the inn sitting room, Wimsey poured himself a measure of scotch and addressed Bunter. "We have established that the hatbox's contents were tampered with during transit. We have a maid who carried it but denies knowledge of any stain or injury. We have a sister who seems more concerned with propriety than sorrow. And we have a timeline that breaks down between 3 in the afternoon and the following morning." Bunter nodded. "We need to probe that gap more deeply." Wimsey rose, donning his coat. "Then we shall visit the local physician, Dr. Lemming. Perhaps he can shed light on the exact circumstances of Major Marlowe's death. The surgery was a modest affair, smelling faintly of antiseptic and stale tobacco. Dr. Lemming was a man of middle age with a slightly bulbous nose and a distracted manner, as if the weight of his practice were a physical burden. "Good evening, Doctor," Wimsey said. "I seek your professional opinion on the passing of Major Theodore Marlowe." The doctor's eyes flicked up nervously. "Ah, yes. Poor fellow. Bronchial complications, advanced age, and a history of heart trouble. Did you attend him personally on Tuesday?" "Yes, twice. Morning and afternoon. Did you find anything unusual in his condition?" Lemming hesitated. "Well, the Major was weak but stable. No indication of sudden trauma. His death was peaceful, I assure you." "And the time of death?" "Estimated between 10 and 11 that night. The exact hour is difficult, of course." Wimsey's brow arched. "But the Major was well enough to be visited by the vicar at 3 in the afternoon." "Yes, he was conscious then, though drowsy." "Did you note any injuries or bruising?" The doctor looked uncomfortable. "There was a mark on his left wrist, a bruise, possibly from a fall, but nothing serious." "Was it consistent with a struggle?" No, I don't think so. Wimsey exchanged a glance with Bunter. Thank you, Doctor. One final question. Did you see anyone else at Ashby Lodge that day? Only the family and the maid. No visitors. As they left, Wimsey mused aloud. A bruise on the wrist, you say? That is curious. If no struggle occurred, how did it happen? Bunter tapped his chin. A fall, perhaps? Or a self-inflicted wound? Possible. But we must remember that bruises do not lie, though people do. And I suspect the bruise is a clue, not a red herring. Their next move was to re-examine the crime scene. Ashby Lodge at night bore a different aspect, a silence more profound, shadows lengthened by flickering candlelight, and the faint smell of lavender and disinfectant lingering in the air. Wimsey stood by the hearth, fingers tracing the carved oak mantelpiece. Observe, Bunter, the placement of the furniture. The room is arranged to favour one vantage point by the window. It seems the Major spent much of his time gazing outward, perhaps hoping for visitors or reprieve. He moved to the window and peered out. The window is partially ajar, Bunter frowned. That seems odd for a June evening. Indeed. Why open a window when the air is cool and the patient unwell? Could it be a signal, or the route of an escape? They moved silently through the house, noting small irregularities. A door that failed to latch properly, curtains slightly askew, a silver salver missing from the sideboard. Every detail is a potential piece of the puzzle, Wimsey said softly. Even the absence of something is a presence in itself. At the threshold, Bunter stopped. My lord, the back door is unlocked. Wimsey's eyes gleamed in the dark. Ah, the servants' exit, the means by which secrets slip away into the night. They stepped outside into the moonlit garden. The scent of damp earth and roses mingled with the distant hoot of an owl. Wimsey lit a cigarette, the small flare briefly illuminating his impassive features. This is no ordinary case, Bunter. The victim may be dead, but the truth remains, very much alive, and waiting to be found. The village of Little Dithering held its breath as the investigation gathered momentum, and Lord Peter Wimsey, with his ever-present combination of detachment and brilliance, prepared to unravel the tangled web that had ensnared Ashby Lodge and its secrets. The morning brought with it a pale and uncertain light, casting a grey wash over Little Dithering as if the village itself were still in a state of tentative mourning, or perhaps unease. Lord Peter Wimsey was already astir before the sun crested the low hills, his mind refusing to rest when so many loose threads dangled invitingly within reach. Breakfast was a silent affair at the inn. Bunter, efficient and unobtrusive, presented, Wimsey with the day's telegrams and a fresh pot of tea. Wimsey took both with an air of detached gratitude, sipping the dark liquid as if it were a balm for his restless thoughts. He returned to the particulars that had troubled him overnight: the displaced salver, the unlocked back door, the bruise on Major Marlowe's wrist, and most of all, the tampered hatbox with its replaced cord and hidden stains. Bunter, Wimsey, began, voice low and precise. The minor peculiarities are the most valuable. They speak the language of intention, sometimes desperation. Our task is to translate. Bunter inclined his head. I'm entirely at your disposal, my lord. The postmaster's report was revealing, though not yet definitive. The box was tampered with en route, but by whom? The maid Agnes swears. Innocence. Yet the stain and the broken perfume bottle tell a different story. There must have been a hand or hands to loosen the cord, to replace it, and to disturb the contents. Do we have the train schedules for that day? Indeed. The 2:15 from Paddington, arrival at Little Dithering at 5:42, with no stops worth noting except the usual interchange at Reading, a journey of just under 3.5 hours. Wimsey unfolded the timetable with a faint smile. A leisurely afternoon for any would-be assassin or secretive passenger. But the key is the station stopovers and the opportunity for surreptitious intervention. They resolved to visit the railway station. The platform was modest, with a waiting room, exuding stale tobacco smoke and a faint odour of coal dust. The station master, a wiry man named Mr. Tuttle, greeted them with cautious politeness. "Ah, Lord Peter Wimsey, I hear you've taken an interest in the unfortunate events at Ashby Lodge." Wimsey inclined his head. "Indeed, Mr. Tuttle, might you recall if any parcels were handled unusually on the 2:15 train?" The station master furrowed his brow, then reached beneath the counter to produce a logbook. "Nothing unusual, sir, except for a delay at reading, about 15 minutes owing to a signalling fault. Any unscheduled visits to the luggage van? Any chance parcels were accessed during that stop?" Tuttle shook his head. "Officially, no, but unofficially, well, you never can be certain. The guards sometimes take liberties, and occasionally local porters assist with the heavy bags. Do you know the names of those porters?" "Yes. There's Tom Hawkins and Charlie Millard. Reliable men, but not above a private job for the right price." Wimsey made a mental note. "Thank you, Mr. Tuttle. We shall speak to them presently." Outside the station, the morning mist was beginning to lift, revealing the soft contours of the rolling countryside. Wimsey lit a cigarette and exhaled thoughtfully. The delay at Reading, he mused. An opportunity perhaps to open the box. Would the parcel have been accessible during that time? The luggage vans were detached and shunted between platforms. Security was lax, just enough to discourage casual interference, but not professional tampering. They found Tom Hawkins first, a sturdy man with hands hardened by years of heavy lifting. His demeanour was guarded, but not hostile. "Mr. Hawkins, I understand you were on duty handling parcels on the 2:15 train from Paddington to Little Dithering on Tuesday." "That's right, sir. Long day it was. Did you notice anything unusual about any parcels, particularly a hatbox marked fragile?" Hawkins hesitated, then said, "There was a box heavier than it looked, sir. I remember because it was awkward, and the cord was frayed when I first handled it. The parcel was opened, and then someone had tied it up again with new string. Looked odd to me. Did you see who did that?" "Can't say for sure, sir. The guard, maybe. He was a nervous sort, didn't seem keen on anyone meddling with parcels, but he wasn't paying full attention during the stop at Reading." Wimsey exchanged a glance with Bunter. "And the guard's name?" "Charlie Millard, sir." Charlie Millard was next, found at the village pub, where he nursed a pint with the weary air of a man used to long days and longer nights. "Mr. Millard," Wimsey began, "you were on the 2:15 train as guard, handling the luggage?" "That's right. What's this about, then?" "We understand a parcel, a hatbox, was opened and resealed during the journey." Millard's face darkened. "I did check that parcel at Reading. It was odd, smelled strange, like something had spilled inside. I tied the cord back up myself, but I didn't open it." "What kind of smell?" Bunter asked, leaning in. "Like perfume mixed with something metallic. Could be nothing, but it put me off." Wimsey nodded slowly. "You had no reason to suspect foul play at the time?" "No, sir. I just wanted to keep things moving." Back. Outside, Wimsey lit another cigarette, the smoke curling around his thoughtful face. "Now, Bunter, consider. The parcel was tampered with at Reading, the cord replaced by Millard, the guard. The stain and broken bottle were already inside, presumably before Reading. Whoever packed the box in London concealed the evidence." "Could the stain have been blood?" Bunter asked. "Almost certainly. The metallic scent Millard mentioned would correspond. This implies violence before the parcel left London, or immediately after." Wimsey's mind sifted through the possible suspects. Agnes, the maid, who insisted on innocence; the family, whose motives were murky; the sister, with her discreet disdain; and now the railway employees, who might have been unwitting pawns or deliberate accomplices. A return to Ashby Lodge was necessary. They arrived just as the household was stirring. The housekeeper greeted them with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "We have more questions," Wimsey said courteously, "particularly about the maid, Agnes Hart." "She's in the kitchen, sir, up early, as always." Agnes appeared, a young woman with a nervous smile and hands that betrayed slight tremors. "Miss Hart, may I ask again about the hatbox you carried from London?" "I told you, sir. I had no idea it was heavy or stained. Is it true you went into town after delivering the box? For errands or visitors?" She nodded. "I ran to the post office for a telegram, yes." "Did you see anyone on the road? Any strangers or unusual happenings?" She hesitated. "No, sir, just the usual village folk." "And the bruises on the major's wrist, did you notice them?" Her eyes flickered. "I didn't pay much attention." "Was the major prone to falls?" "Sometimes, yes, but nothing serious." Wimsey's expression softened slightly. "Miss Hart, if I may be frank, it seems something untoward happened during that journey. If you remember anything, no matter how small, it could be crucial." She swallowed hard. "There was someone at the station in London, a man, well-dressed, but with cold eyes. He spoke to me briefly, asked if I was carrying anything dangerous." Wimsey's interest piqued. "Do you recall his name?" "No, sir. But he gave me this card." She produced a small embossed calling card, worn but legible. "E. Fenton, solicitor." "Thank you, Miss Hart. That is most helpful." They took their leave and made for the solicitor's office in the village. The premises were tidy, if unremarkable, but the man who answered was anything but. Mr. Edmund Fenton was a sharp-featured, precise individual with an unsettling air of control. "I understand you wish to discuss the parcel connected to Ashby Lodge," Fenton said smoothly. "I represent the interests of Mrs. Halliday, who is most concerned about the welfare of her late brother." "Mrs. Halliday's interests are noted," Wimsey said, "but we seek only the truth." Fenton's gaze sharpened. "I can assure you, Lord Peter, that the truth is often a matter of perspective." "Indeed. Pray, Mr. Fenton, what was your involvement with the hatbox?" "It was a delivery arranged to bring certain personal effects to Little Dithering," Fenton replied. Mrs. Halliday wished to keep the matter discreet. "Was the box sealed before dispatch?" "Yes, but Mrs. Halliday instructed that the box be opened at Ashby Lodge in her presence." "And who packed the box?" "The maid, under Mrs. Halliday's direction." Wimsey's eyes narrowed. "And the contents? What might they have contained?" "To warrant such secrecy," Fenton smiled thinly. "Letters, some old documents, and a small bottle of perfume, sentimental items." "Sentimental but broken." Fenton's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly masked it. "Accidents happen." As they left the solicitor's office, Wimsey lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly. "The plot thickens, Bunter. The sealed box, the broken bottle, the replaced cord, all deliberate. Someone sought to conceal something significant. And the presence of Mr. Fenton suggests a vested interest in the outcome. We must delve deeper into Mrs. Halliday's role and her relationship with her brother." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they formed was still obscured by shadows. The village, the house, the servants, and the mysterious parcel, each held a secret waiting to be uncovered. And Lord Peter Wimsey, with his characteristic blend of irony and intellect, was resolved to find it before it was too late. Lord Peter Wimsey returned to Ashby Lodge with a quiet determination that belied the storm of thoughts swirling behind his composed facade. The late morning sun sifted through the heavy curtains, casting long shadows across the polished floorboards, as if the house itself was reluctant to shed its secrets. A faint, lingering chill clung to the air, a residue of unease that no amount of hearth fires could dispel. Wimsey paused at the threshold of the drawing-room, surveying the scene with his habitual critical eye. The furniture was arranged with the studied care of a household accustomed to appearances, yet subtle disarray betrayed the recent turmoil: a fallen photograph frame, a displaced cushion, and the faintest trace of a dark smudge on the edge of the Persian rug. Small details, trivial to the casual observer, but to Wimsey they were the cipher of unspoken truths. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pritchard, awaited him with a mixture of reverence and apprehension. "Lord Peter," she began, "there's something you might wish to see. It concerns the late Major Marlowe's private study." "Lead the way," Wimsey said, voice even but edged with interest. The study was a compact room lined with bookshelves burdened beneath the weight of leather-bound volumes and scattered papers. The desk bore signs of recent disturbance. A stack of letters knocked askew, an open blotter with smeared ink, and most notably a faint impression on the blotting paper that suggested the presence of a letter hastily concealed. "Curious," Wimsey murmured, lifting the blotter carefully. "There's been a hurried attempt to obscure some writing here. Possibly a secret correspondence. I should examine the papers more closely." Mrs. Pritchard nodded. "The Major was a private man, my lord. Few knew the extent of his dealings, beyond the estate." As Wimsey sifted through the documents, a particular letter caught his attention. A sheet of creamy stationery, folded and refolded until its creases were nearly worn through. The ink, faded but legible, bore the signature Eleanor Halliday, the very sister whose presence and influence seemed woven tightly into the fabric of this mystery. The letter was cryptic, yet charged with urgency. "Dearest Reginald, the shadows lengthen around us. You must trust no one in Little Dithering. The Hatbox holds what they seek to suppress. Burn this letter, once read." "Eleanor." Wimsey's eyes flicked to Mrs. Pritchard. "Has this letter been here all along?" "It was found among his papers after the incident, my lord," she replied. "I did not think to mention it before." "Quite so. I dare say our late Major was embroiled in matters more perilous than mere estate management." The implication was clear. The box was not merely a sentimental container, but a vessel for secrets potent enough to provoke threat or violence. Wimsey pondered Eleanor's warning, sensing layers of familial discord beneath the polite veneer. A soft knock interrupted the moment. The vicar, Reverend Mayhew, entered with the cautious step of a man uncertain whether his intrusion would be welcomed. "Lord Peter," he began, "I have been reflecting on the recent events. There is talk among the villagers, whispers of old grudges, debts unpaid, and perhaps darker dealings linked to Ashby Lodge." Wimsey regarded the clergyman with a faint smile. "Reverend, the village is a cauldron of suppressed tensions, as all villages are. Might I trouble you for a list of those closest to the family, particularly anyone with grievances or unusual behaviour?" The Reverend hesitated before producing a small notebook. "Here are some names: local tradesmen, old friends, and, notably, one Thomas Barrett, a distant relative recently returned from abroad under mysterious circumstances." "Thomas Barrett," Wimsey repeated, "a new piece on the board." "Indeed, my lord. He arrived but a fortnight ago, yet has made no great effort to ingratiate himself." Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. "And the Major's recent dealings with this Barrett?" "Minimal, from what I gather, but the Major was wary, almost fearful, of his presence." The conversation deepened Wimsey's conviction that the family's facade masked a web of strained relationships and unspoken fears. The next logical step was to confront Thomas Barrett directly. They found Barrett at the village inn, a man of striking presence despite his attempts at modesty. His dark eyes held a guarded defiance, and his hands, though well kept, betrayed the habit of a man accustomed to tension. "Mr. Barrett," Wimsey began smoothly, "I understand you are recently returned from abroad." "Yes," Barrett answered, voice steady though cautious. "After several years in South America." And your connection to the late Major Marlowe? Distant family ties, nothing close. Though we shared a mutual respect, Wimsey observed him closely. Mutual respect does not preclude disagreement or grievance. Barrett's gaze hardened. The Major was a man of strict principles. I, perhaps less so. I returned to assert certain claims that were overlooked in his lifetime. Claims of inheritance? Among other things, Wimsey's brow furrowed. Might these claims have been the subject of contention? Potentially, Barrett admitted, but I did not seek confrontation. Yet confrontation found you regardless, Wimsey remarked. The man shifted uncomfortably. I cannot speak to the tragedy that befell my uncle. I was away when it occurred. Understandable, Wimsey said. But your sudden appearance and the timing are, shall we say, fortuitous. Barrett's lips twitched in a faint, ironic smile. Fortune is often a harsh mistress. Leaving Barrett to his thoughts, Wimsey's mind returned to the Hatbox and its concealed contents. The letter from Eleanor hinted at secrets worth killing over. Barrett suggested motives of inheritance and resentment. The broken perfume bottle and stained cord hinted at a physical struggle or a frantic concealment. Wimsey was certain the truth lay not in a single revelation, but in the interplay of these elements. Later that afternoon, with Bunter's assistance, Wimsey examined the Hatbox itself under a magnifying glass. The replaced cord was of different thread, its knot less practiced. The broken perfume bottle was glass of an unusual make, faintly exotic, its shattered contents faintly visible. The box bore faint fingerprints, some smudged, some clear. Most intriguing was the faint trace of a peculiar powder, a residue Bunter identified as a rare narcotic. Curious, Wimsey mused. A narcotic powder hidden alongside sentimental items. Concealed and perhaps intended for use or smuggling, Bunter suggested. Wimsey's eyes gleamed. Or poison. The stain, the bruise on the Major's wrist, the hurried secrecy, all point towards a fatal machination. He resolved to confront Eleanor Halliday herself, whose motives remained opaque. The sister's presence loomed large, as did the unspoken power dynamics that governed the family. That evening Eleanor received them with a composed, if guarded, grace. Her dark eyes shimmered with a practiced blend of sorrow and steely resolve. Lord Peter, Mr. Bunter, she said quietly. I understand you have questions. Wimsey inclined his head. Indeed. Your letter suggests a fear that compelled secrecy. What were you protecting your brother from? Eleanor's gaze wavered briefly. From ruin, financial, social, and perhaps something worse. There are things you do not know, things better left buried. Yet the Hatbox and its contents were not meant to remain hidden indefinitely. No, she admitted. But I never imagined it would lead to this tragedy. Wimsey studied her. Who else knew of the box's contents? Only myself and Reginald. And after recent events, my solicitor, Mr. Fenton. And this Mr. Fenton? Trusted, though cautious, he advises discretion. Discretion, Wimsey echoed, often a cloak for concealment. Eleanor's composure cracked for a moment. You speak as though you accuse me. Not yet, Wimsey said with a faint smile, but I'm piecing together a puzzle that implicates many. As night fell over Ashby Lodge, the shadows deepened and the silence thickened. Lord Peter Wimsey's mind raced ahead, weaving together the threads of deceit, fear, and ambition. The game was far from over, and the players many, but the final act promised to be as intricate as it was inevitable. The following morning dawned misty and subdued, as if the very atmosphere at Ashby Lodge had taken on a conspiratorial hush, conspiring with the shadows that lingered in every corridor. Lord Peter Wimsey, roused early by habit rather than necessity, found himself restless, the mind's gears turning ceaselessly as he prepared to follow the slender threads that might unravel the Gordian knot of the Marlowe mystery. He requested the presence of Mr. Fenton, the solicitor whose name Eleanor had reluctantly disclosed the previous evening. The man arrived punctually, a prim figure in conservative attire, whose neatly trimmed moustache and precise manner bespoke a mind disciplined to the point of rigidity. "Mr. Fenton," Wimsey began after the usual civilities, "you advise the family on legal matters, I understand." "Yes, Lord Peter. It is a delicate business, given the circumstances." "Indeed. I am told you alone, apart from Mrs. Halliday, knew of the contents of the Hatbox and their significance?" The solicitor adjusted his spectacles, nodding. "Only Miss Halliday and I were privy to those documents. It was imperative to keep them secret, given their sensitive nature." "Would you care to elaborate on the nature of these documents?" "Their sensitivity suggests they might relate to matters beyond mere inheritance." Mr. Fenton hesitated briefly, then acquiesced. "They concern a rather delicate family dispute, dating back several years, involving a contested will and an undisclosed codicil. It is a matter that could have considerable ramifications for the estate's succession." Wimsey's interest piqued. "And the contents of this codicil?" "Unfortunately, I cannot disclose the details without explicit permission, but I can say that it introduced a degree of complexity, particularly in relation to the claims of Mr. Barrett, whose position was less than straightforward." "Mr. Barrett, the distant relative recently returned from abroad?" "The same. His claims, while legally tenuous, caused no small consternation within the family." "Fascinating," Wimsey murmured. "Legal quibbles so often disguise deeper motives." "Tell me, Mr. Fenton, did you notice any unusual behavior among the family members in recent weeks? Any peculiar requests or alterations in routine?" The solicitor pondered. "There was an incident regarding the locks to the study door. Miss Halliday insisted upon changing them shortly before the tragedy." "That is noteworthy," Wimsey said. "I have also observed discrepancies in the timing of certain visits and phone calls. Would you happen to have access to telephone records or visitor logs?" "Indeed. I have copies here," Fenton replied, producing a neatly bound folder. Together, they perused the logs. Wimsey's keen eye quickly discerned a curious detail: a series of calls made to the vicarage in the days leading up to the Major's death, several of which were brief and conducted at odd hours. The visitor's book also recorded an unusual number of entries by a certain Mrs. Margaret Caldwell, a woman hitherto unknown to Wimsey. "This Mrs. Caldwell," Wimsey mused aloud, "is evidently a person of some interest. Would you know who she might be?" "Only by reputation," Fenton replied. "She is known locally as a recluse, rumoured to dabble in spiritualism and esoteric studies. Her presence here is a puzzle." "Aha." Wimsey smiled thinly. "The faint scent of the supernatural, perhaps. And yet we know better than to place faith in such apparitions. Tell me, do the records reveal anything of note about her visits?" "Brief consultations with the Reverend Mayhew, it would seem. Possibly seeking counsel?" "Very well. It would be prudent to speak with Mrs. Caldwell and the Reverend to ascertain their roles in this curious tableau." Wimsey thanked the solicitor and dismissed him with a polite nod. As Fenton departed, the detective turned his thoughts to the vicar himself. There was something about the man's carefully measured demeanour that suggested a reserve, perhaps even reticence. It was time to put him under gentle scrutiny. Wimsey arranged to meet Reverend Mayhew at the village church, a modest but dignified structure that stood sentinel over the sleepy hamlet of Little Dithering. The vicar awaited him in the vestry, clad in his clerical collar and bearing a book that appeared to be a ledger of parish affairs. "Lord Peter," he greeted, offering a hand. "I trust you are well." "As well as can be expected under such circumstances," Wimsey replied. "I have some questions about your recent interactions with Mrs. Caldwell." The vicar's eyes narrowed subtly. Mrs. Caldwell is a troubled soul. She has sought spiritual guidance of late, as many do in times of distress. Do you find it unusual that a reputed spiritualist would seek counsel from the church? Not at all. People are often drawn to different sources of solace. Mrs. Caldwell is, however, somewhat secretive about her activities. Secretive, you say? Would you care to elaborate? The Reverend shifted uneasily. She has been engaged in seances and other such practices. I have cautioned her against indulging in these, but she is steadfast. Wimsey's curiosity deepened. And what of her connection to the Marlowe family? Does she know them well? Only peripherally. I believe she was acquainted with the late Major through social circles. Her visits in recent weeks were motivated by concern over the increasing tension within the household. Very interesting. Have you observed any unusual conduct in the family? Perhaps disputes or fears that might explain the Major's apprehension? The vicar nodded slowly. There have been rumors of financial difficulties and old resentments. The family's pride often masks their troubles, but I suspect they run deep. Wimsey pressed further. And the visits to the vicarage? Telephone, calls and personal meetings, mostly to seek spiritual counsel or to arrange for the comfort of the family in these trying times. Nothing more sinister, I assure you. Wimsey inclined his head, but his mind harbored doubts. The pattern of calls and visits suggested a network of communication designed to mask something else. He resolved to see Mrs. Caldwell without delay. The cottage where Mrs. Caldwell resided was at the edge of the village, a weather-beaten structure surrounded by tangled ivy and an untamed garden. Wimsey was greeted at the door by a woman of striking appearance, sharp-featured, with eyes that gleamed with an intensity at odds with the pastoral surroundings. "Lord Peter Wimsey, I presume," she said, her voice calm but edged with a certain theatricality. "I have heard of your reputation. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Wimsey stepped inside, noting the eclectic decor, crystal balls, tarot cards, and shelves of dusty tomes. The faint scent of incense hung in the air. "I am investigating the death of Major Reginald Marlowe," Wimsey explained. "Your name has come up in connection with recent visits and conversations. I am eager to understand your role in these events." Mrs. Caldwell smiled enigmatically. "Ah, yes. The Major was a troubled man. He sought my aid in matters beyond the tangible secrets, and fears he dared not share with others." Wimsey raised an eyebrow. "And did your consultations involve any discussion of the Hatbox?" She hesitated, then nodded. "He believed it contained a key to his salvation or destruction. He was haunted by what it represented." "Yet you claim no involvement in the events that led to his demise?" "None whatsoever, Lord Peter. I am but a conduit for those seeking truth in shadows." Wimsey's gaze sharpened. "And the narcotic powder found in the Hatbox?" Mrs. Caldwell's eyes flashed. "I have no knowledge of that." "Curious," Wimsey murmured. "And what of the broken perfume bottle?" She shook her head. "No idea." Despite her theatrical flair, Wimsey suspected Mrs. Caldwell was a useful informant rather than a culprit. Still, her presence added another layer of complexity to the investigation. As he left the cottage, the early afternoon sun had begun to pierce the fog, illuminating the village with a tentative clarity. Yet Wimsey knew that clarity was still a distant prospect. The shadows cast by deceit and fear were long and tangled. Returning to Ashby Lodge, Wimsey pondered the intricate web of relationships and secrets. The family's outward civility masked fractures both old and new, financial disputes, emotional betrayals, and psychological torments. Each player in this drama had motives and opportunities, and the subtle clues, the misaligned clocks, the peculiar timings, the concealed letters, were pieces of a puzzle still incomplete. One fact remained indisputable. The truth was bound. Up in the Hatbox and its contents, guarded jealously by those who feared exposure. As evening fell, Lord Peter Wimsey prepared for the next phase of his inquiry, resolved that the silent walls of Ashby Lodge would yet yield their final confession. That evening the fog thickened once more over Little Dithering, cloaking Ashby Lodge in a damp and chilling embrace. The manor seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the next move in a game whose stakes were slowly becoming all too clear. Lord Peter Wimsey, seated in the familiar but ever-revealing atmosphere of the library, lit a slim cigar and allowed his mind to trace the intricacies laid bare during the day. A sudden thought struck him. The clock in the hall. He had noticed it had stopped the morning after the Major's death, an oddity he had dismissed at first, yet the significance now gnawed at him. Was this another trivial detail or a deliberate manipulation to unsettle the timeline? He made a mental note to revisit the clocks around the house with fresh eyes. Before he could lose himself further in speculation, a discreet knock interrupted his reverie. It was Miss Halliday, her face composed but betraying a faint trace of unease. She carried a small, leather-bound notebook which she handed over with the words, "This belonged to Major Marlowe. You might find it useful." Wimsey took the book with a polite nod and examined it under the library's lamplight. It was a diary, or rather a log, with terse entries spanning the previous 6 weeks. The handwriting was neat but tense, the script shrinking and enlarging with the Major's moods. Each page recorded appointments, visitors, and brief reflections, an attempt perhaps to impose order on a world increasingly uncertain. The first entry that caught Wimsey's attention was dated exactly 2 days before the Major's demise. Met with solicitor. Hatbox contents must remain secret. Trust is a luxury. Beneath it, a hastily scribbled note. Suspicious calls to vicarage. Mrs. Caldwell involved. The entry confirmed much of what Wimsey had already gleaned, but it added a new dimension. Major. Marlowe himself suspected that the vicarage communications were not as innocent as they seemed. Why, then, had the Major not confided this suspicion to anyone else? Fear or something deeper? Wimsey's fingers traced the page with a scholar's care. Another line read, "Clocks inconsistent in the lodge. Need to check mechanism." Who benefits? From confusion? The detective smiled thinly. The Major had noticed the same detail but had not solved its significance. Wimsey resolved to investigate the clocks immediately. Miss Halliday observed quietly from the doorway. The Major was meticulous, yet he seemed increasingly paranoid. He mentioned feeling watched, though I thought it mere nerves. Paranoia, or prescience, Wimsey mused. The line is often thin. Tell me, Miss Halliday, did the Major ever mention any quarrels with family members? She hesitated, then admitted, he was uneasy around Mr. Barrett. There was tension, unspoken but palpable. Also some resentment from the younger nephew Philip, though nothing overt. Wimsey thanked her and dismissed her with a courteous smile. Left alone, he pondered the familial undercurrents, resentment, fear, suspicion, and how these might feed into the tragic outcome. The first clock he examined was the hall clock itself, a grand antique that dominated the room with its ornate brass pendulum and elaborate face. At close inspection, Wimsey noted the minute hand was slightly bent, and the mechanism showed signs of recent tinkering. Someone interfered with the timekeeping, he said aloud. But to what end? His answer came with the next discovery. The clocks on the ground floor, including those in the study and dining room, were all set several minutes apart. The study clock lagged behind the hall clock by 7 minutes, while the dining room clock was ahead by 5. Wimsey's mind worked swiftly to align these disparities with the known timeline of the evening's events. If witnesses relied on these clocks for their accounts, their statements would naturally diverge, creating a fog of confusion. It was a clever ruse, subtle and yet profoundly effective in obscuring truth. The question remained, who had the motive and opportunity to manipulate the clocks. As he continued his inspection, the butler, Mr. Graves, appeared quietly in the doorway. "You asked about the clocks, my lord. I was asked by Miss Halliday to wind and check them last week." "By Miss Halliday, you say? Were there any peculiar instructions?" "No peculiar instructions, my lord. Only to ensure they kept good time for the house guests. But I did notice that one clock, the study's, had a loose back panel when I went to wind it." "Loose back panel?" Wimsey's interest sharpened. "Yes, sir. I thought it odd, but assumed it was from previous repairs." Wimsey thanked Graves and made a mental note to inspect the back panel immediately. He suspected that the study clock was not merely inaccurate, but perhaps altered to conceal something. Returning to the study, Wimsey examined the clock carefully. The back panel came away with a soft click, revealing a small cavity inside the clockwork housing. Within it was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age but unmistakably recent in its creases. Carefully unfolding the note, Wimsey read a hastily scrawled message. "Time is the key. Beware the shadow that moves with the hour. Trust none." A cryptic warning, yet no signature. This revelation confirmed that the clock tampering was intentional, designed to mislead and sow distrust. Wimsey sat back, lighting a fresh cigar as the pieces aligned in his mind. The deliberate manipulation of timepieces was a classic stratagem to distort eyewitness testimony, a fact well known to seasoned investigators, but often missed by the less perceptive. The clock tampering suggested the culprit was intimately familiar with the household's routines and keenly aware of the investigative process. Miss Halliday's name lingered in the background. After all, she had access and authority over the clocks. Yet Wimsey was cautious to withhold judgment. His next move would be to confront her gently, observe her reactions, and probe for inconsistencies. Meanwhile, the matter of the Hatbox remained unresolved. The narcotic powder, the broken perfume bottle, the missing contents, all elements of a puzzle that suggested a motive steeped in more than mere inheritance. It hinted at blackmail, guilt, and perhaps a desperate bid for control. The village gossip, the spiritualist's involvement, and the solicitor's discreet warnings formed a chorus of whispers that pointed towards psychological torments rather than simple greed. Wimsey planned to revisit the family's personal correspondence, especially letters exchanged in the weeks preceding the Major's death. If the victim had feared exposure or betrayal, evidence might lie hidden in ink and paper. As night deepened, the detective summoned Miss Halliday to the library. The conversation was carefully measured like a game of chess played with words. "Miss Halliday," Wimsey began, "I have examined the clocks and found evidence of tampering. You were responsible for their maintenance?" She nodded, her expression guarded. "Yes, but I assure you, I would never interfere with them to mislead." "An investigation?" "Of course not. Yet someone left a note hidden within the study clock, warning of shadows and mistrust. Do you know anything of this?" Her eyes flickered briefly, betraying momentary surprise before she composed herself. "I do not. Perhaps the Major himself left it. A cryptic message to prepare others. An intriguing possibility. Tell me, Miss Halliday, have you noticed any unusual behavior among the household members? Any secret meetings, clandestine conversations, or unexplained absences?" She hesitated, then spoke quietly. "There was an argument between Philip and Mr. Barrett a few evenings ago. It was hushed, but the tension was unmistakable." Wimsey's interest piqued. "Arguments often reveal much beneath the surface civility. Were you privy to the subject?" "No, but I overheard mention of the settlement and old grievances." Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. "The settlement, that may refer to the codicil mentioned by Mr. Fenton. It appears the family's financial matters are intertwined with personal vendettas." The conversation ended with Wimsey thanking Miss Halliday Though his mind was already racing ahead, the distorted clocks had been a smokescreen, yet the genuine threat lurked in the tangled loyalties and secret pasts of Ashby Lodge's inhabitants. He resolved to review the visitor logs again, scrutinize every call made to the vicarage, and examine Philip's movements closely. The pieces were falling into place, but the final picture remained elusive. In the stillness of the night, as the fog clung stubbornly to the grounds, Lord Peter Wimsey sat back with a wry smile. The game was far from over, but now he held a critical advantage. Time, once confused and manipulated, had yielded a telling clue. The unmasking, when it came, would depend on this subtle mastery of chronology, and the cruel human passions that lay beneath the veneer of Ashby Lodge's genteel facade. The dawn cast a pale, watery light over Ashby Lodge, seeping reluctantly through the heavy curtains of the library where Lord Peter Wimsey still sat, the ash of his extinguished cigar cooling in the tray beside him. The night's reverie had yielded a faint but persistent unease, a sensation that the household's carefully maintained calm was about to shatter under the weight of its own contradictions. The clockwork enigma and the cryptic note from the study clock were far from mere curiosities. They suggested a cunning hand at work, one intent on muddling the timeline and, by extension, the narrative of the Major's final hours. Such interference demanded a culprit intimately familiar with both the mechanics of the house and the rhythms of its occupants. Yet none of the servants or family had openly confessed to such knowledge. It was an invisible stage on which the drama had unfolded, and Wimsey intended to illuminate every corner. He rose, stretching with the languid grace of a man whose faculties had been honed by long hours of cerebral exertion rather than physical toil. His next step was to scrutinize the visitor log once again, those ledgers often overlooked but rich with unspoken meaning. There lay the names, the times, the seemingly innocent visits from the village doctor, the solicitor, and the occasional tradesman. But beneath this routine lay patterns discernible only to the astute eye. Wimsey's gaze sharpened on the entry, for the evening before the Major's death. A visitor named Mr. Horace Caldwell, listed as calling at precisely 7:23 p.m. The same Horace Caldwell who was vicar of the parish and the recipient of the mysterious intercepted calls mentioned in the Major's diary. The coincidence was no longer tenable as mere happenstance. What had the vicar discussed with the Major, and why was the solicitor so keen to conceal these communications? Wimsey felt the familiar curl of irony at how the sacred and the profane so often entwined in these country dramas. As he prepared to visit the vicarage, he rang the bell for Mr. Fenton, the solicitor, who had proven himself cooperative but guarded. Within minutes, the lean, precise figure of Fenton appeared in the library doorway, bearing a look that mingled apprehension with professional courtesy. "My lord," Fenton said, "I understand you wish to discuss the vicar's visits and the Major's affairs. I can provide what is permissible, though I must caution that some matters remain confidential." Wimsey inclined his head with a faint smile. "Indeed, Mr. Fenton, but you must appreciate that the truth often requires us to tread delicately between discretion and disclosure." Over a brief and measured exchange, Fenton confirmed that the Major had confided certain sensitive information to the vicar. Matters of conscience, he claimed, but would not elaborate. He also hinted at the existence of a sealed letter, entrusted to his care by the Major, to be opened only under specific circumstances. "That letter, Mr. Fenton, is precisely what I intend to see," Wimsey remarked. "The key to understanding the Major's fears and the nature of the threats he perceived." Fenton hesitated, then acquiesced, producing a sealed envelope stamped with an official seal. Wimsey accepted it carefully, noting the weight of the Major's final concerns folded within. The visit to the vicarage was a study in contrasts. The vicar, Horace Caldwell, presented as a man of calm demeanour and unruffled civility. Yet his eyes held a flicker of unease when questioned about his communications with the Major. "I am bound by my sacred office to listen to the troubled and to offer counsel," Caldwell said with measured sincerity. The Major was burdened with a secret that gnawed at his soul, but I assure you, nothing untoward passed between us. Wimsey's smile was courteous but inscrutable. Secrets, Reverend, have a habit of manifesting in actions as much as in words. Might you be so kind as to recall the precise nature of your last meeting? The vicar's gaze wavered. It concerned the Major's estate and certain unresolved matters of trust and loyalty, but I cannot divulge the details. Confidentiality is sacrosanct. Wimsey nodded, unfazed. Of course, yet you will forgive my insistence that in a matter of life and death, every shadow deserves illumination. He took his leave, returning to Ashby Lodge with the sealed letter and a growing sense of the subtle forces at play, forces that intertwined guilt, loyalty, and dread into a knot as tangled as the fog now lifting from the moors. Back in the privacy of the library, Wimsey broke the seal with deliberate care. The letter inside was penned in the Major's distinctive hand, each word weighted with urgency and resignation. "My dearest Philip," it began, "if you read this, it means that events have unfolded beyond my control. I write not as a father, but as a man who has come to understand the true cost of secrets. There are those among us who would see the estate's fortune squandered, not by chance, but by design. Trust no one who smiles too sweetly, and beware the shadows that gather in familiar faces." The letter went on to hint at a hidden document, a codicil to the will, concealed within the study's secret drawer, a place known only to the Major and one other. Wimsey's mind raced. The missing codicil was the fulcrum upon which the entire mystery pivoted. Its existence explained the tension between Philip and Mr. Barrett, the obscure references to settlement in overheard quarrels, and the desperate measures that might have been taken to suppress it. The question remained, who was the other person with knowledge of the secret drawer? The Major's closest confidant was Miss Halliday, yet her reaction seemed genuine, her distress authentic. The servants appeared uninvolved, and the family dynamics, while fraught, did not suggest complicity on a large scale. Wimsey decided it was time to examine the secret drawer itself. The study offered a grim silence as he approached the polished writing desk. Pressing a concealed latch, he revealed the hidden compartment. Inside lay a small leather-bound folder, fragile with age. Opening it, Wimsey found the codicil, carefully typed and signed, an amendment naming an unexpected beneficiary, the vicar, Horace Caldwell. A gasp from the doorway made Wimsey glance up sharply. Philip stood there, pallid and tense, eyes darting between Wimsey and the document. How did you—" Philip stammered. "Evidence speaks when the living do not," Wimsey replied, his voice calm but firm. "This codicil explains much, the tensions, the threats, and why the Major feared for his estate." Philip swallowed hard, then said, "My father's last wishes. I never knew of this, nor did many," Wimsey said. "But the question remains, who sought to conceal it, and why?" As the morning light strengthened, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the study's gloom, Wimsey felt the inexorable approach of revelation. The pieces were converging, the shadows growing thinner, yet, in the quiet tension, he knew the final act would hinge on a confrontation where truth would be wielded like a scalpel, cutting through deception, exposing not only a murderer, but the fragile psychology that had led to that fatal evening. With the codicil uncovered and the vicar's potential motive laid bare, Lord Peter Wimsey prepared for the gathering storm that would soon unmask the delicate balance between trust and betrayal within Ashby Lodge. The atmosphere in Ashby Lodge thickened with the weight of revelations as afternoon descended, the grey skies casting a sombre pall over the once cheerful manor. Lord Peter Wimsey, having meticulously scrutinized the codicil and observed Philip's fluctuating composure, found himself poised on the cusp of unveiling a labyrinthine scheme of deception that went far beyond simple greed. Philip Barrett's pale agitation seemed genuine, yet there lingered a subtle incongruity, an edge of defiance beneath the surface, as if some inner fortress remained unyielding. It was this flicker of resistance that compelled Wimsey to press on, not with accusation, but with the gentle artifice of inquiry. The codicil names the Reverend Caldwell as beneficiary, Wimsey mused aloud, folding the fragile document with reverence. A curious choice for a man of the cloth, no? One might expect the family to be the natural heirs. Philip's eyes darkened momentarily. Father admired the vicar's counsel and charity. It was a gesture of gratitude, perhaps misplaced but sincere. Gratitude is often repaid in ways less than straightforward, Wimsey replied, a glint of irony in his gaze. Tell me, Philip, did your father ever express unease about the vicar? Threats or suspicions, perhaps? The younger man hesitated, then exhaled sharply. There were disagreements over parish funds, the estate's donations. Father suspected misappropriation but had no proof. Wimsey's thoughts turned to the intercepted letters and the clandestine meetings with Caldwell, a financial quarrel hidden beneath ecclesiastical decorum. Yet that alone could scarcely explain the murder, nor the elaborate tampering with the clock and the visitor logs. He decided the next step lay with Caldwell himself, whose calm demeanor seemed a veneer barely concealing nerves. Returning to the vicarage, Wimsey found Caldwell awaiting, his pallor more pronounced in the subdued light of the small study. I have read the codicil, Wimsey began without preamble. It names you beneficiary. An unusual testamentary decision. Caldwell's hands clenched imperceptibly. The Major was generous, but I fear this has caused misunderstanding. Indeed. You must understand, Reverend, that a murder investigation requires full transparency. Your relationship with the Major, the disputes, the secret meetings, these raise questions. The vicar's voice dropped to a whisper. I did not kill Philip Barrett, nor his father. But yes, there was cause for concern. The Major threatened to expose certain matters that would have ruined my standing. I begged him to reconsider, to leave me out of it. Matters involving parish funds? Wimsey prompted. Caldwell nodded reluctantly. Some monies were diverted to cover debts I accrued. The Major discovered this and insisted on rectifying the will. I was desperate. Wimsey sensed the confession was incomplete, like a mosaic missing several tiles. You say the Major threatened you. How exactly? The vicar's gaze faltered. He said that if I did not confess and make restitution, he would go to the authorities and the press. My position would be destroyed. The codicil was his final attempt at leverage. And the murder? Wimsey's voice was quieter now, almost pitying. I do not know who killed him, Caldwell said, voice breaking. But the night he died, I heard voices raised in anger at the lodge, then silence. Wimsey left the vicarage with a new hypothesis forming. The crime was likely born not just of greed or retribution, but of tangled loyalties and desperation. Caldwell's predicament was damning, but perhaps not sufficient motive for murder. Another player lurked in the shadows. Back at Ashby Lodge, Wimsey called upon Miss Halliday. Her composure remained impeccable, though her eyes betrayed exhaustion. She spoke with precision about the Major's last days, confirming the discovery of the codicil and the vicar's involvement. Yet when asked about the secret drawer, she revealed a crucial detail. Only she and the Major had keys, but on the fatal evening, the drawer had been found unlocked. Unlocked, Wimsey echoed. An open invitation, then, to the interloper. Miss Halliday nodded. I secured it after Father's death, but on that evening, I was certain it was locked. The discrepancy suggested a deliberate manipulation, Someone had gained access unnoticed, tampered with the evidence, and fled before discovery. Wimsey then revisited the servants' testimonies, searching for the invisible thread connecting their movements with the unlocked drawer. One detail surfaced. Young James, the footman, had been asked to deliver a message to the vicar, but his recollections were vague, the timings inconsistent. Summoning James discreetly, Wimsey observed the boy's demeanour, a blend of nervousness and misplaced bravado. Under gentle questioning, the boy revealed that he had been sent twice to the vicarage on that evening, but the second message was hurried and cryptic. Wimsey deduced that James's second errand was an urgent summons, one that coincided suspiciously with the estimated time of the murder. Returning to the vicarage, Wimsey confronted Caldwell with this new information. Caldwell's face blanched. "I sent for James to fetch a parcel, a letter that I hoped would settle matters." "A letter? From whom?" "From an anonymous source, threatening to expose my debts unless I handed over the codicil. I never received it." "Yet the letter is here," Wimsey said, pulling the parcel from his coat, a folded note marked with the same seal as the Major's. The vicar's composure crumbled. "You're implying that the letter and the parcel were part of a stage ploy. Someone sought to manipulate you to create suspicion." Wimsey's final move was to revisit Philip Barrett, who had remained unnervingly silent through these developments. "Philip," Wimsey said quietly, "I must ask. Your anger with your father was profound. You stood to inherit a considerable fortune, yet your father made a secret provision for the vicar. Might you have wished to erase that?" Philip's jaw tightened. "Yes, I resented the vicar's interference and my father's trust in him, but I would never kill." "Yet you had opportunity and motive," Wimsey replied smoothly. "The unlocked drawer, the altered clock, the manipulated visitor logs, these are not the marks of an innocent man. You orchestrated the red herrings." Philip's facade cracked. "You know nothing of what it cost me, of the humiliation, the ruin I would face." "Precisely why desperation can drive even the gentlest to extremes," Wimsey said, standing with the air of finality. At that moment, a commotion erupted in the hall as police officers entered to take Philip into custody, his protests fading into a defeated silence. As the household settled into uneasy calm, Wimsey allowed himself a wry smile. The clock's strange behavior, the petty jealousies, the secret notes and misdirected calls, all threads woven into a tapestry of human frailty and cunning. He lit a fresh cigar, and as the smoke curled toward the ceiling, he murmured to himself, "As Shakespeare said, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. Ashby Lodge has been reminded most cruelly." The case closed, the shadows dispersed, but in Wimsey's mind, the ever-turning gears of human complexity had only begun to reveal their design. The drawing room was hushed, the afternoon light waning behind the heavy curtains, casting long shadows that seemed to hold their breath. Philip Barrett sat rigidly by the fireplace, guarded by two officers whose expressionless faces betrayed nothing. Around the room, the assembled household, Miss Halliday, Reverend Caldwell, the servants, watched in a tense silence, all eyes flicking expectantly toward Lord Peter Wimsey. Wimsey himself stood composed, his posture impeccably straight, fingers lightly tapping the arm of his chair, a faint smile playing about his lips. He cast a glance at the heavy, once discarded hatbox resting on the floor, a curious prop, the very one that had ignited the entire investigation with its puzzling weight. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth, arch, yet imbued with a gravity that held attention. "The truth is often concealed not in grand gestures, but in the smallest details, those seemingly inconsequential whispers of reality. Tonight I intend to peel back the veil that has shrouded Ashby Lodge in suspicion. He gestured toward the hatbox. "Recall that peculiar burden I remarked upon at our first meeting. How a simple container of straw could feel so unnaturally heavy. That weight was the first thread to tug at the fabric of deception." He paced slowly, eyes alighting on Philip. "Mr. Barrett, your anger toward your father and his will was evident. Yet it was not passion alone that stained your hands, but calculation. You knew the Major kept the codicil locked away. Only you and Miss Halliday possessed the key. And yet, on the fatal evening, that drawer was found unlocked, a subtle but deliberate alteration." Turning to Miss Halliday, Wimsey said, "You maintained the drawer's sanctity until that evening, did you not?" She nodded, pale but resolute. "Yet someone must have had access," Wimsey continued, "and that person was none other than Mr. Barrett, who seized an opportunity while the household was distracted. The tampering with the clocks, the falsified visitor logs, all orchestrated to fabricate an alibi and mislead both police and family." He paused, his eyes narrowing with incisive wit. "A tangled web of deceit, though not without its holes. The contradictory timing of the vicar's summoned messages, young James's nervous recollections, and the missing parcel, each a strand that, when woven together, forms a net from which truth cannot escape." Turning to Reverend Caldwell, Wimsey added gently, "Your involvement was fraught with error and desperation, but not criminal intent. The threats and financial improprieties you feared were real, yet insufficient to drive you to murder. You sought only to preserve your livelihood, not extinguish a life." He returned his gaze to Philip, who now sagged under the weight of revelation. "You coveted your inheritance, yes. But your greed alone would not have solved the riddle, had you not made one critical mistake: the misplaced trust in timing and the underestimated vigilance of those around you." Wimsey lit a cigar and exhaled slowly, the smoke curling in elegant rings. "Philip Barrett, you murdered your father to prevent exposure, to secure your claim, and to silence a man whose discovery threatened your future. Your efforts to mislead were clever but flawed. The devil, as ever, resides in the details." A long silence followed, broken only by Philip's resigned sigh. "I had no choice," he whispered. "The ruin was unbearable." "Ah, Wimsey," replied softly, "but as Shakespeare reminds us, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. Choices we make are the architects of our destiny." As the officers moved to escort Philip away, Wimsey cast a final glance around the room. Ashby Lodge may once have been a bastion of respectability, but tonight it stands revealed as a theatre of human frailty, where pride, jealousy, and fear played their grim parts. He straightened his tie and prepared to depart. May justice here be tempered with understanding, for all involved have borne heavy burdens. And as ever, in the quiet aftermath, the only certainty remains that truth, however deeply buried, will find its way to light. With a courteous nod, Lord Peter Wimsey stepped into the gathering dusk, his figure retreating down the ancient gravel drive, leaving behind a household unsettled, yet, at last, free of its darkest secrets.